Dawson's Rambles.
Hey YouTube, Dawson Ryder here. In today's video, I'm going to be doing another what-if scenario. Now, I did two videos like this already, which was what if Saban Brands had kept PR, what if Disney had kept PR, what I think those realities look like. And there's one more I wanted to do for now, which is effectively like what if Hasbro's plans had succeeded, or more like if Hasbro had kind of stayed the course. There's several different points, whether it was the movie or the reboot show, and kind of looking at if Hasbro effectively hadn't given up, what would it look like, what would have succeeded, what would have failed. And I think it's interesting because in a lot of ways, despite the fact that it's kind of more concrete in some ways, like we know some of their exact plans, I have a hard time saying certain things with certainty. Like in the Disney speculation video, you know, none of this is certain. Myself or nobody in the comments can really say because it's all speculation. But if I'm being honest with Disney, I feel fairly certain that if they hadn't sold it, it would have laid dormant. Or like the Disney Plus thing. And same thing with like if Saban had kept it. I feel like I can say with like 80% personal certainty if they had kept the show going, whether it was up until now or for just like 2 more years, it would have been the same quality. I don't think there would have been a refresh in the way they did the show. But with a lot of this, I can't say for certain because there's so many moving parts, and a lot of it revolves around Power Rangers perception. I know I've talked about that a lot, but I really think that's kind of the key focal point no matter what era, is you can't really predict how people will react in regards to Power Rangers. I think we know the general consensus amongst a lot of the casuals is, hey, PR was this cool show I watched when I was little. I love Tommy and Jason, but it's also lame as hell. Get it away from me. I'm going to use it as a shorthand for of poor quality. And that's the problem, is that like you can't predict how people would react. And I think when it comes to speculating on certain projects, I think that there is always a chance it could be successful, but unfortunately a Power Rangers movie or a reboot show or anything Power Rangers that isn't the kid show that's watched by the small fan base and kids has a very narrow window of success because of its public perception. But before we get started, does anyone want to get out? I wanted to talk about actually the toys, like how the toys would continue. And I think that's fairly easy to sort of speculate on. Like, I'm not sure about all the behind the scenes factors of why and how they shifted that terrible plastic quality of that one of those last waves. But presuming that that's off the table, I feel like if things had been more successful, we likely would still be getting toys, you know. I'm not sure what they would do for the reboot. I do feel like something I am fairly certain about in regards to whether they had pushed forward with the reboot show and whatnot, is we probably would have winded down the main show as we know it. So I don't think there would be a main toy line, especially since they started pretty strong with Beast Morphers, but then after that, they kind of really tapered out. Like the main show line was pretty small. Like we got the main stuff, but I mean, its presence was pretty small. So I do feel that that is one thing I'm fairly certain about, is whatever direction they took the reboot, there likely wouldn't be a version of the main show. I think their intention was always to wind that down after their existing contracts were up. But that's what I mean is like toy-wise, I don't think we would have a main line based off of whatever adaptation, because I don't think there would be any more adaptions. But I think there would obviously be something, but I'm just curious, like, would they try to have a toy line for the reboot that would appeal to the younger audiences, more of a casual one, or would it all be collectors based because it was targeting older? I don't know. But I do think that we probably would have continued the Lightning Collection, probably in a similar vein as we were getting it, similar vein to Marvel, similar vein to DC, not DC, well I guess, but I mean Star Wars, not because they own DC, but I mean the same types of figures. You know, we would get more new teams, we would get reissues, we would get the variants, probably some 5-pack stuff like that. I think we would have done more with the Zap Zords. I remember the White Tiger Zord was in early planning before everything got the kibosh put on it. So I think that that would have largely continued in the form it was. I think in there probably would have been some QC issues, some valid complaints, some whining. It probably would have largely continued the same as we knew it. Now, as far as like what would have happened with the property, so I think there's like two different timelines for this one. One is when they were planning on just making a movie. And then the other one is when it was going to be Netflix stuff. That it was, I think they started out saying that it was going to be a movie that turned into a series, and then I think eventually they were just going to do the series. But those are kind of the two timelines. Now, the movie I think is the hardest one to predict, because if they had kind of gone, like not fast-tracked it, but if they had kind of gone at a decent pace, they would have gotten the movie out at least decently closer to when the last movie came out compared to like now, obviously. It wouldn't have been right on top of it, or even necessarily as close as like the Spider-Man reboot between when they announced Spider-Man 4 and then Amazing Spider-Man was announced and all that stuff. But it would have been decently close, so I'm kind of curious what kind of reception that would cause, because obviously the 2017 movie didn't do very well, but I don't think it didn't do well for the reasons that people like to say. Like, I think there was a lot of factors. Again, I think it's Power Rangers sort of uphill battle, but I think that there was just so many factors that went into that. The fandom likes to make it seem like, well, it didn't have enough action and it wasn't tokusatsu-y enough. I'm like, the stuff that only the hardcore fans care about. I mean, I know that it didn't blow up, but most of the casuals I've seen that saw it liked it. Like, I've seen numerous reviewers and other people I've talked to and been like, I wish it would have gotten a sequel. Again, I know it didn't do gangbusters, but I think it was received well by the people that saw it. So I'm curious, like, would those people be confused, like, why are they doing a reboot? I do think that that probably would have been an uphill battle factor if they were just doing a movie. As it probably would have been similar to 2017 in the sense that it would have gone for a little bit more of an aged up take. I still don't think the 2017 movie was dark and gritty. People always say that. I mean, like, some of the lighting was darker, but I don't think it was dark and gritty. I think Power Rangers fans just clutch their pearls anytime anyone does anything that isn't out of Pleasantville. But anyway, I think that that would have been kind of an uphill battle, to be honest. I do think there's one positive if they would have, like, fast-tracked it. I'm doing a lot of air quotes lately. But that is something I talked about in regards to another battle that Power Rangers would face now with the reboot show, is the sort of oversaturation of the market with superhero stuff and superhero fatigue. You know, that's a whole other conversation. I brought that up and people say, it's not superhero fatigue, it's bad writing or whatever, which can be true. It's like, it's been proven that people will show up for the good comic book movies they're liking, like the Batman or the Spider-Verse movies or Guardians of the Galaxy 3, so on and so forth. But I do think that a lot of it in regards to the casual audience is just the oversaturation. It isn't even necessarily that they aren't interested in seeing some of these, it's just that there's so much content nowadays. You know, you go online and it's a very much an echo chamber of people like, they don't want to see it because it's woke! And it's more like there's just so many things. Like, I think a lot of the MCU fatigue for the casual audience came down to, there's so many projects now. Like, it used to be so much easier to keep up with. And then in addition to like having so many Disney Plus shows releasing, in addition to the movies, then you also have what DC's doing. You have The Boys, you have Invincible, you have anybody else that's trying to start anything similar. So it can seem overwhelming. So most of the casual audience a lot of the time is just like, God, there's just too many things. I might just watch the few that I'm really interested in. And so I think that's a battle that Power Rangers would face now, is that it would be like white noise, because it's like a Z-list property amongst all these other A-list properties bringing their work out. So I think that would be an uphill battle. But a positive they would have faced if they had gotten the movie out sooner is that it was before there was too much oversaturation. It would have been around the time that that superhero stuff, there was a lot of it, but it was during that boom where there was just enough, where there was a good amount of content, but people were still eating it up. So I think that they would have had that as a positive. But I think that being so close to the 2017 movie and the fact that it didn't do well would also cause people to be like, they're rebooting this already. And like, maybe a lot of people didn't want to see the 2017 movie because they were like, oh, Power Rangers is lame. And they're like, they're doing another reboot? I'm definitely not going to see that now. So I think that would have been tough. I mean, I think there's always a chance there could have been a success, but I really think that as much as the fans want it, I think a theatrical release as a main launching pad for a new era is one of the biggest battles Power Rangers would have. I think a Netflix reboot is a lot smarter, whether you start with, or any streaming service, it doesn't matter. I know people are always like, oh, Netflix is the devil. Like, everybody's the devil. The entire fan base of any fan base has become Bobby Boucher's mom. Like, Disney's the devil! Marvel's the devil! Feige's the devil! Like, Jesus. Anyway, where was I going with this? Oh, yes, it doesn't matter. Oh, yes! What I meant was, like, it doesn't matter what streaming service, like whether you start with a movie or a TV show. I do think that's smarter because you could end up hitting something like with Cobra Kai or like when Voltron first debuted, where it's kind of a surprise. Like, oh, this is really cool. You know, this property I was familiar with, I knew when I was a kid, and this cool new show came out. So I think that a streaming service thing could have been the way to go. And that's the other timeline, is the streaming service taking off. Honestly, as cool as I think it would be to start it with a movie and then go into a show, I think you should just start the show from the get-go. And so let's just talk about that, like if they were to just do the show. Now, I think the show would also face an uphill battle of the perception of it. But I do think the chances would have been greater for it to be good enough to achieve that sort of surprise factor of somebody checking it out because it was based off of a property they knew when they were kids and were surprised by the quality of it. And Netflix, a lot in something like that, being a lot more accessible because you can binge it. A lot of people have subscriptions, and a lot of people, you know, share subscriptions and stuff like that. I think it would have been able to get a lot more word of mouth and been a lot easier to watch than like having to go out to the theater, although stuff comes to video on demand pretty quickly. But I think it would have been a greater chance of success there. Now, I did a speculation video back when we thought the reboot was going to come out. I don't think, though, that the chances were very high that it would have launched us into a new renaissance or anything, unfortunately. I do think there's a chance, but like I said, the thing is Power Rangers has such a narrow window. I do believe that there is a window and there is a universe out there where it did really well and it did launch a renaissance and a new public perception, but I think the chances were unfortunately slim. I really feel like the biggest likelihood would have been, on the positive side, is it would have done pretty well, maybe got some early word of mouth, probably would have gotten a second season and then been quietly canceled. Or maybe just gone one season. But I think the best case scenario would have been maybe going for a season 2, maybe 3, but then been canceled. And I think like even if it had done really well, I don't think it would have started a new era where this reboot would have aired for another 30 years. If it had done really well, it probably would have aired like maybe 4 to 5 seasons and then moved on to the next thing, which I wouldn't have been upset about. But I think that that's probably where we would have seen things go, is I think that its greatest chance would have been to go 1 or 2 seasons, and then where do you go after that? That's what I'm curious about. Like, let's say that it did decently well, gets a second season, maybe a third, then it ends. Where do you go from there? Do you build off of that universe? Do you go back to Sentai footage? I don't know. That's what's kind of interesting, is I think that they were banking on this new era, but a lot of the times with these new eras and on streaming shows, it doesn't launch you into another 30-year legacy where you're having that. I think that in all likelihood, if it had done well and been enough for something, been enough to have Hasbro maintain interest in it, it probably would have turned out like something with TMNT or Transformers, where every few years it saw a reinvention. Which, quite honestly, I would be okay with. I would be okay with if we got a reboot show that lasted a few years, and then we kind of hit a quiet period for a while, and then you come back with an animated series, quiet for a while. You know, I kind of like that, even if it was mmpr, but I think those would have been the scenarios, is you would have had the reboot maybe go for a couple seasons, and then if it did well, and it did last the amount of seasons it wanted to go, I think we would have been in for something more traditional in regards to the way we experience franchises here, where it kind of reinvents itself every few years with a new series or a movie or whatever. But what do you think? What do you think would have happened if Hasbro had actually succeeded in some degree to their plans? Like, what do you think the timeline looks like where the movie came out? What do you think the timeline looks like where the reboot came out? Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell to get notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.